Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker. Is Andrew McAnulty from, he's the CEO of Link Housing, and Andrew is a respected community housing figure, both nationally and internationally. He's delivered, well, not all on his own, I don't think, but I think he's assisted in delivering social and affordable and large-scale urban renewal outcomes for over 25 years across Australia and the United Kingdom. Delivering, and those outcomes, they've delivered thousands of quality mixed tenure homes for people in need. I had the privilege, and a few of us here in the room today, to have a bit of a twilight chat with Andrew last night, and he really talked to us very strongly about how to lobby our MPs and our local MPs and make those issues, highlight that those issues are really important in our local communities. So Andrew's experience highlights the innovation and vision required to create cutting-edge outcomes for projects which link government, the private sector and the community housing sector in order to actually deliver those outcomes. So please welcome, and I think I need to click this for him. Sorry, we should have done this before. Here we go. Andrew, welcome.
So, good morning. I'm pretty unstructured, so I'm in more ways than one. So I'm happy to take questions as we go along. If anyone's got anything they want to ask, by all means, just chip in. I'd also like to add an acknowledgement of that we're on Aboriginal lands and pay my respects to Aboriginal people and leaders, past, current, and present. I think it's an incredibly important thing that's done in Australia by acknowledging Aboriginal people. I think some of that just needs to translate into what we're able to do as government, not-for-profit, and individual citizens and the private sector. I think we need to do more. Maybe stating the obvious, but what I'm going to go through. It was a really interesting twilight session yesterday. Good discussion, quite thought-provoking. I'm not going to be lecturing. I'm not going to be saying this is how it's done in the UK, this is how it's done in Sydney. I'm really just going to intentionally say a few thought-provoking things and trying to just stimulate what has to happen in Queensland and how we do more with less. Because ultimately, if you ask government for an extra $1 billion, you're not going to get much audience about how you get $1 billion. I want to thank Leonie, Jane, Rachel and Scott for the invitation up here. I don't come to Brisbane as much as I'd like, but it's always good to talk to other colleagues and get different perspectives on what we can do as well. I recognise a lot of people in the room, so acknowledging people I've known for a while and people I've met last night. So I think it's very powerful. And if people want to or are in Sydney and want to share a few ideas or have a look at some of the things we're doing, I'm very open to sharing anything really. Because something I've learned in my career is it's not about us, it's not about us as individuals, it's not about us as companies, it's about how we do more with less. And what I think I've noticed over the last few years is people, when there's less and less funding, people tend to fight over it more and maybe be less strategic. So a phrase that was mentioned yesterday, people fighting over a torn fiver, as opposed to thinking about what's the problem and how do we change thoughts, change minds. Let me see if I can move this. So I'll run through a few pictures. Like I say, it's pretty unstructured, but there's a little bit about Link's journey. So Link, as I was sharing last night, is a collection of 5 smaller organisations that emerged over the last 10 years in the northern Sydney area. So there was 5 organisations that were small, around the 150 to 200 homes, or the last 3 were that size. The original ones were sort of 100 homes, but they all formed, and I joined around almost 5 years ago when the last merger had happened, and that brought together an organisation with 900 homes. So it was 30 years in the making to create 5 organisations that came together. And when I joined, the things that I focused on, the bottom things there, were pretty important to this discussion. I think it was about there were small local organisations with limited capacity. That was when they even came together, but they were ready for growth. So they had a story to tell, and they were really well regarded by their local communities. These were organisations which were well respected but didn't have much capacity. And sort of interestingly, this was the last organisation that came in, again, all within a very small geographical area of about 10 kilometres, was Ride Hunters Hill. And I was mentioning to Donna Marie this morning, one of the tenants who was the chair of Ride Hunters Hill Housing Cooperative, a chap called Michael, he's on our tenant advisory group now, but when he was the chair of that and he came in, he's told me some really interesting stories. But one was they thought they'd lose their identity. They thought that as the organisation got to 500 homes, it would not be connected with its customer. That it would be, you'd be anonymous as a staff member or as a board member, as a tenant. But he shared at our AGM last year, the year before last, that actually the opposite's happened. He's felt that as we've got bigger, partly because of the focus of the organisation being about people and property being a vehicle to house people, but the property not being the aim, the people being the aim, that he felt we'd got stronger, we'd got more customer focus, we had more capacity, and we were doing things better than we had done previously. So that was pretty interesting. This again is a bit provocative. This is something which Tony Gilmore, if anyone knows, Tony Gilmore did this back as the date suggests, and it shows there was about 4 or 5 really good organisations. There's a well-respected Queensland housing sector. It's respected throughout the rest of the country. But back in around the time of the stimulus package, you had 4 or 5 bigger organisations in Queensland, and this is not fully after stock transfer and Tanya Plibersek and Kevin Rudd, but some of the nation building homes are in this here, and little links down there at number 26 with about 900 homes post the 5 mergers. We set out when I joined a really clear strategy, a very simple strategy. We had a 20-page strategy document before, and then we worked to a 1-page strategy document, which was saying our strategic direction over the next 2014 to 22. And it was really focusing everything the organisation does, indoctrinating new starters, with the simple how you succeed in your job, is the clarity around the mission. This has been the mission statement. This has been evolving each year. The one that was added a couple of years ago was by the board around leadership, which was quite an interesting one in the bottom corner, which says the courage to shape the future. So that was about not accepting status quo and not thinking it's about us, but about people in need, and actually not being be a participant. So again, when I joined, these bullet points on the bottom as well, I think are pretty relevant to some of the discussion last night with a range of CEOs and people from regional organisations. But we established a growth agenda to get everyone on the same page. I was joking with Donna Marie earlier that the previous chair of the board said to me, I said, I don't like change, and she said to me, bullshit, you love change, you push change all the time. No one who brings their family from London to Australia is afraid of change. But I think I don't really like change, but I like things that are obvious happening, and I like setting an agenda and driving things. And this is what we did. We sort of established a growth agenda. Everyone was clear as an organisation we were going to grow, and we hadn't grown for about 15 years apart from the mergers. There'd been no natural growth within the organisation. We said we wanted to move up the food chain in terms of profile. We needed to be telling people. There's no point in us having a great business plan and ideas if we didn't tell anyone about it. And we had to deliver what we'd been asked to deliver. So we'd won a relatively small nation building transfer of 218 homes, and we had to deliver a certain amount of new homes. We were the first organisation in New South Wales to do that because we focused on our contractual commitment. And these are probably 4 of the things that were outcomes in the first year and a half. We delivered our nation building contractual commitment. So we went from being an unknown organisation to what was regarded as a pretty small star performer. So we spent about $10 million on new homes. We became Tier 1. We went from Tier 2, good catch, to Tier 1. We focused on staff. We did a staff survey. We entered into the Great Places to Work survey, and we got recognised, which was lovely. And we cemented our presence saying we want to grow in our heartland. We weren't saying we wanted to grow in Adelaide. We didn't want to grow in the Hunter. We wanted to grow in northern Sydney and wider metropolitan Sydney. And then this is how it's translated into almost 5 years later. We've carved out, on one of the earlier slides, it showed the growth pattern, we said the base case is growing at 100 homes per year. That's what we expect. The middle line, which was more jaggedy, was around targeting management transfers in Sydney, and the steep line was around targeting a big management transfer. And why that was quite important to set that graph and share it with the board and the staff was saying, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to double the organisation within 3 years, and we're going to try and double the organisation in another 3 years. So we were very, very intentional. And people would say, but Andrew, there's no market, nothing's happening. At the time, 4 or 5 years ago, people were saying, it's all happening in Queensland. Nothing's happening in New South Wales. It's a dead sector. New South Wales is dead. There's no ideas. There's nothing happening. So quite interesting how that's changed. One of the things that came through feedback yesterday afternoon was this isn't about how it's done in New South Wales and look how good it is in New South Wales. It's actually saying there's so much housing need throughout Australia, so much housing need in remote Queensland and most metropolitan major cities. This is something that has to happen here. So it's to pick out nuggets which you can advocate on behalf of your own sector here and your own organisations. But last Thursday, we're now Wednesday, last Thursday we took on 268 bed spaces with the Cerebral Palsy Alliance, which came out of almost nowhere. It was a tender we put in, we came out, we spent a month on it, we submitted it, and a month later we were awarded it. It was quite remarkable. But within our business now, that's a really quite significant part of our business. And the bottom one being the management transfer that we secured at the tail end of last year and go live on later this year. But we'll have a network of 4 offices in a very small geographical area. So this is then my views on how it translates here and my learnings from London and Leonie's right. You don't do things on your own, but you do things with like-minded people where you can drive. And one of the things I've learned is you don't keep pushing at a closed door. You have to figure out how you align with people and who wants to go on a journey with you. And sometimes it might only be modest things, but you need to sort of figure out who your champions are and then push with a champion and build momentum. But you need drive. You need to have. We talked a bit yesterday about patience and not having patience. You need to have the vision, the long-term vision that you keep motivated, but you also need to have a bit of impatience that you want it done today. But this is ultimately what has to happen. This is why transfers are quite important. This is a slide I put together a few years ago for a bid we bid for, and no one was awarded it. This is about 4 years ago. But it was saying transfers aren't in themselves the answer, but transfers increase cash flow within community housing providers, they increase capacity within organisations, and they increase your scale. But you want to transfer, then you want to asset plan, then you want to deliver mixed tenure, and then you want to be placemaking. Good housing entities are in the space of placemaking. They're in this goal of each time they bring something on new, each time they build new developments, it's placemaking. But where we are here, we need to build our capacity, and the best way of doing that in a low risk way is selling the benefits of transfer. So it's picking the bones of why it's been done in Tasmania, why it's been done in South Australia, why it's been done in Queensland or in New South Wales, and then why hasn't it been done in here, trying to change the view of Minister and get a pilot project up, a smaller pilot project. And there's a few things here, but what I like about this slide, there's lots of people drawing different housing continuum slides, but government's got a view and the private sector's got a view pretty much. Government do things which lose money, the not-for-profit sector tries to do things that break even, and the private sector does stuff that makes money. But if that's always going to be the way, then government's restricted because it's only doing things that loses money. It's tying the hamstrings of providers in Queensland in terms of your cash flows, so you're restricted too much. And anything that's worth anything goes out to the market. So it's changing the paradigm of how do the not-for-profit sector working with government break this mould a bit to actually be more commercial. Different way of saying a similar thing. The relationship here is a minister won't go to ICAT because of a conversation with a not-for-profit. So it's actually trying to get the sweet spot of the not-for-profit talking with government around the ideas, the outcomes, the strategy, and then engaging with the private sector about how it's scaled up. So how you then bring on board your Grocons and your Westpacs, but not getting the deal started by a Grocon and a Westpac all the time, or a Lend-Lease, because they've got a different motivation than the community housing provider and government about a homelessness problem or a remote indigenous opportunity. So really it's building a link between government and the not-for-profit community housing sector in this instance to make it more relevant in floating answers, but not floating answers and questions around how Link Housing does X, but almost focusing on what the problem is. And then this was something which was quite interesting, I thought, yesterday. The only slide I showed yesterday, which was actually, again, similar thing, showing it in different ways, but there's loads of consultants. There's from one side of the page. There's loads of specialists. There's lots of builders, not many big builders, developers, banks and financial institutions. There's a small amount of not-for-profits. There's an even smaller amount of community housing providers even focusing. There's an even smaller amount of community housing providers when you look at a regional area or a part of a city. If you pick, say, Donna Marie's area of Cairns, how many organisations could grow in that area? If you pick Anglicare Central Queensland, how many organisations could grow in that area? So this is why government needs to think about what's the problem, who's the potential partner, and work it up between government and the not-for-profit, and then scale it out. I'm shocked how many times I see proposals drafted from the other side of the page, and then they come out in a competitive tender, and everyone picks up the document and goes, "What a silly tender document," as opposed to the problem being looked at from the other side of the page. And I love this next one, if I can go to it. This is something, we had this chap, Michael McCallum, come to a board strategy day at Link about 3 years ago, and I was fascinated by him. Really big picture, futurist discussion, and he was talking about normal and new normal and different phrases I hadn't really thought of, but I annotated this with the blue boxes. Normal in Australia, this is old New South Wales figures, but normal in New South Wales around public housing is there's a big balance sheet. There's negative revenue. They're losing a couple of $100 million per year, but that's okay because the properties are worth a lot of money. The Auditor General report says they're poor quality properties, low tenant satisfaction, massive backlog in repairs, and you're losing money. But normal is that's acceptable. The poor quality, lots of great people involved in public housing, both tenants and staff, but a broken system. But then what has to happen is this uncertainty needs to be created around, the middle bit, all the uncertainties of the middle bit. And why does that need to happen? Because it needs to move to a new paradigm of more investment, more housing, improvement of the existing housing, reducing of the waiting list, empowering of marginalised people. That's not going to happen if normal is accepted. And normal's broken, so why accept normal? So it's the paradigm shift that has to be pushed. And then I think more so, this is something I shared with the board as well a while ago, more so in, you tell me where Queensland providers are. This is I was trying to push with ministers as well, Brad Hazard and others. I developed this one to share with Brad Hazard actually. This around, you could do transfers and you could do just really harvest CRA. You could really put people in a box and just not optimise the position of CHPs. Or you could sort of look at a place-based approach. You could look at giving incremental risk. We're not Lend-Leases now. We can only do certain things, but you could transfer incremental risk and co-design up the solution. So it's really, where do you see yourself as businesses? Where does government see you as businesses? And how over time can you move yourself over to the right-hand side of the page? And again, this is why I love working in community housing providers. I've worked in community housing providers for about 15 years in the UK and best part of 10 years here. And it's because as a local organisation, you're connected to various businesses in the area, various support providers, and you tend to be, because the housing is a capital cost and expensive, and it's long term. You can be an anchor in terms of how you link in and trigger change if you use it. We work with, like all of you, I'm sure, we work with loads of support providers. We've got about formal MOUs in place and service level agreements with over 30 different support providers, from mental health, domestic violence, youth homelessness, very specific things, and more general support as well. And motivation for me goes back to people. You know, we've got a really effective dynamic tag. Again, I was sharing with a few people, one of the most rewarding bits about my business, when you become a CEO, you get less connected with the grassroots. So I like to make sure I go along to every tag for half an hour, you know, when they meet every 6 weeks, because you want to. And I've said, we had a new CFO come on board 2 years ago, 18 months ago, and he was introduced to the tag as part of his induction, and he was there when I said, you know, we're always putting in a bid for something, and I was sharing with the tag that they've got the power to get rid of me as CEO. And they were saying, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, if you were unsatisfied with Link Services and you were sharing that with me, I said, and then you'd be entitled to share that with the board, there would be something wrong within the business. And I said, I'm sure you'd give me time to rectify it, but if I wasn't able to rectify it, then you'd have the power to undermine me as a CEO. And they were like, well, you're doing a pretty good job, Andrew. We really like you being here. And afterwards, our CFO said, where's that in our constitution, Andrew? That's not in our constitution. I've read that. I've not seen that in our constitution. I said, well, I want to be involved in an organisation that's doing good things, is regarded as doing good things, and is pushing the boundaries and communicating well. And if our tenants were saying we're not doing that, then, you know, probably not an organisation I deserve to still be involved in. So we celebrate. Something I learned from a big urban renewal project in London, you have to celebrate milestones. And you're often always, especially in senior levels, you're often always thinking about the next one. So you get, last week we went live on this disability transfer. You didn't even cut a cake. We're then focusing on our management transfer and a tender with the Northern Beaches Council that went in yesterday. But you do have to actually step back and make sure you're celebrating as well, because big achievements actually when you hit a milestone. And then this is my last slide. This is something I took about 10 years ago before we emigrated to Australia. I had a meeting with the Redfern Waterloo Authorities board. I was senior team. They're disbanded now, but I walked around and showed this slide at the end, and they were saying, did you get that slide from our website? And I didn't. I was walking around Redfern and took the photo because I liked it, because you got the beauty of the Aboriginal flag and then the dominance of the city of Sydney behind, and the sort of money and wealth. It's the juxtaposition there, really. And I had this quote on it, and I still need to meet this woman, Anne Weldon, but I really love it. Leaving legacies and not building empires. It's actually pushing the boundaries of change, not because we're trying to build an empire of a company that's bigger and the best and number one or number three. That doesn't really matter. It's about, are you doing more? Are you affecting change? Are you listening to your people in your area? And, is it fun? Are you driving it? Are you creating change? And, reinvesting outcomes. This is a big thing, I think. MPs, ministers, people in government, maybe in Queensland, need to figure this one a little bit more. Not-for-profits reinvest. Unlock the chains a little bit. Maybe would be one of the low-hanging fruit. That's probably not that low-hanging, but it needs to happen in Queensland, where you've got more control of your cash flows, because you're delivering social outcomes, your vision statements, your constitutions. Government's not at risk. If you went under, your assets and cash would transfer to another organisation, no doubt. So, long-term outcomes.